Mayhem athletes, we are back after a long sabbatical. We are doing another Toolkit video. I have Dom, my friend, here with me, and we have had this question, especially now as the qualifier season is coming up this fall, of how to plan around those qualifiers, how to build a training cycle to make sure that you're peaked and ready for those. Now, if you have a Mayhem performance coach, they'll do this for you, but if you're listening to this and you're writing your own training, this model will help you. So Dom, do you want to kind of introduce the concept before we dive deep?
Yeah, so what we're gonna do here is just kind of show you guys 3 phases about how you get yourself to that comp performance phase and where you're gonna wanna start as you build this through. So you can almost look at this at maybe like 3-4 week blocks, could potentially be longer, but let's just use that as our example. So you're gonna have a 4-week limiter phase, that's gonna lead you into a 4-week bridge phase, and then you're gonna have your final phase right before your comp to peak you for the competition. That's gonna be your performance phase where you're preparing yourself for your actual competition or your qualifier coming up. So if you're doing like Wadapalooza qualifiers coming up in a few weeks in October, you probably have already kind of been working in this limiter phase. You would have been, you'd be in your bridge phase now, and then come October leading into the end of the month, you'd be in this performance peaking phase.
I think it's really important to note that the reason we put these phases in here so that we're actually identifying your weaknesses and preparing you for those so you're better in the competition. Most people are always in a performance phase in the sport of CrossFit. They're just always doing hard CrossFit. And while that does work for some athletes, for those that maybe struggle on the gymnastic skills or their strength, you want to be able to isolate those weaknesses first. And so if we have time, let's say you did have 12 weeks or 16 or maybe even more, that would be ideal. You'd want to start by isolating your weaknesses. So that's the limiter phase. Essentially, what we're doing in an assessment with an athlete is we're looking at what they need to get better at, identifying those limitations, and then building out a training block that's focused on isolating those first. So we're going to get you stronger, we're going to get you your ring muscle ups or strict handstand push-ups or handstand walks, whatever the skill limitation is that you have before we move into the true CrossFit stuff. Dom, do you want to kind of touch on how we do that from the limiter phase into the bridge phase?
Yeah, so once we've kind of isolated the weakness, and let's say you didn't have a ring muscle up and now you can do 3 or 4 unbroken, what we're gonna do as we move you towards your performance phase is we're gonna start to add in some fatigue. So now you actually have the movement and you can do a few in an isolated setting. So now what we can do is maybe now we pair it with a machine. So something it would look like simply is like an EMOM. Minute 1 is like a 12 cal ski. Minute 2 is 3 unbroken ring muscle ups. And we're gonna practice that and build that out over the course of weeks doing that. One thing I would like to add for both of these is when you're working a limiter, or even when you're going into this bridge phase, you're gonna do that thing first in a session because you wanna do it under the least amount of fatigue and early in the session so you can actually focus on your technique even while still integrating fatigue, right? And then as we were talking a little bit earlier, is we would also want to see that earlier in the week. So you might do this on a Monday and a Friday when you're coming off a rest day, so you can ensure that you're actually still ingraining those really good mechanics on movements that you're working on when mechanics are a limiter for you in something like a ring muscle up.
Man, that's such a good point. And I think I felt this as a coach earlier on because I would give them skill sessions at the end or skill work at the end of a session. And most people just aren't able to do that. Now, if you have a high level games athlete, they're doing stuff under fatigue or after maybe a hard session all the time because they have that skill already. But if you're struggling with ring muscle ups, because I know that's a really complex movement, and you're doing those at the end of a Metcon, it's really hard to ingrain high quality movement patterns and get better at that skill. So to Dom's point, I would just reiterate, make sure that you're isolating those things first, and you're doing that at the beginning of a session, and in particular, the day coming off of a rest day, because then you're a little bit more fresh. Yeah. That last piece then is the kind of the fun stuff, right? And this is what everyone wants to talk about, and we'll do plenty of this in the podcast later on, but the performance phase is all about peaking for competition. I always kind of liken this back to, I played football in college. This is when we got into the season. We're like 3 weeks out from our first game. Then we're doing like full speed scrimmages. You have to be able to practice this sport. There's so much chaos. There's so many movement combinations and time domains. And so you have to have exposure to the chaos of the sport, but you want to make sure that you have the skills so you can actually push yourself in that chaos. So this is the time that you would peak for the competition. And here is, I know it's kind of maybe looks funny down here, but essentially what this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We usually take Thursdays as rest days and then Friday, Saturday. And the way that I still like to set this up is even as we're going through the performance phase, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, for most people, will still be true training. We're gonna continue to work on their limiters and kind of like bridge all that, maybe still some fatigue-based work, but we know that in 12 weeks, you're not going to get 20 unbroken ring muscle ups if you don't have any. So we still need to train those. But then on the weekends, we're going to simulate competitions. And this is the reason we do this is because most in-person competitions are like Friday, Saturday, or Saturday, Sunday, whatever it may be. And so this will be true comp prep. So what it may look like is normal training session Monday, normal training session Tuesday, normal training session Wednesday, a rest day on Thursday, and then Friday looks like the competition that you're about to go to. So maybe if you're prepping for Wodapalooza, you do a couple Wodapalooza style workouts, or maybe a strength piece that's kind of strength endurance bias because Wodapalooza loves that. And then afterward, you would do a barbell and gymnastics piece because again, that's something that is biased towards their programming. And then we would do the same thing on Saturday and we would recycle it again the next week.
Yeah. One thing to add to that for comp prep specifically, especially going into qualifier season, I would even add, and if you have a coach, like Brandon said, NPC coaches are equipped to help you guys actually do this so you don't even have to think about it. But what you would want to do for yourself sometimes for qualifiers is practice repeating. In some way, a way you can do that, and this is why we have it on the Friday, is most qualifier weekends, or if you use Wodapalooza, you have like Friday to Sunday or Friday to Monday to finish the first group of workouts. Once you plan that out, you may want to practice, and it doesn't have to be the same workout in practice, but you may want to practice doing a comp workout Friday and then coming back to one on Monday with similar limiters or similar movement patterns so you can work through like, okay, if I did thrusters Friday and I got to do thrusters again Monday and you've never done that, you might want to be doing that. Or like Friday and Saturday, having some movements that are similar, because we'll see that in qualifiers where maybe you have a workout with pull-ups and then the next workout has toes to bar. If your hands aren't ready to deal with being on a bar back-to-back days in a qualifier, it's something worth practicing in this comp phase specifically for qualifiers, which is a little different from your in-person events.
My hands are never ready for that. I'm just gonna be honest. All right, this is kind of like a brief overview. If you guys have questions, just post them down below. We'll be checking out the comments. Or if you want to reach out to us, you can email me, brandondorman@mayhemnation.com. I'll be happy to answer those for you.